what had happened was in conflict. And when I went looking for myself, I had to admit that the original narrative that I had believed in did not seem to hold up.
Welcome to episode 11 of the EQ Deficiency podcast/show. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. In this episode, you will hear from Julie Irwin Zimmerman. Now, if that name rings a bell, it may be because you heard her name thrown around in the media around the first of the year 2020. After writing her article in The Atlantic titled, "I Failed the Covington Catholic Test," Julie received more backlash than she did praise from admitting that she may have made a misjudgment. After meeting and speaking with Julie, I realized that Julie is someone who has high emotional intelligence. Yet, it didn't save her from that backlash after writing her article, which is ironic because we say that we value when people can openly admit when they are wrong. Yet that didn't seem to be the case here. So why is that? Well, you'll just have to listen or watch this episode to find out. So without further ado, here is Julie Irwin Zimmerman. And we spoke probably the first of the year, I believe.
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah, because I found your article and I was like, this would be perfect for my book.
Yeah.
And I don't know did I send you a copy of that, the ebook?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've finished it, but I've been reading it in parts.
How do you feel about it so far?
I think it's so important. I get frustrated that it's such an overlooked part, especially with kids and school.
Yeah.
There's no attention given to that. And I have one child with an extremely high EQ, and I know that she's going to turn out great because of that, but it feels like there's no acknowledgement that that's important, or that there's attention given to its development. So I notice as a parent a real outage in schools, giving that its due and trying to foster emotional intelligence in kids.
Exactly. And that's the paradox, right? Because who's going to teach the teachers?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've read Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel.
No.
So he is the director at the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale. And he wrote a book called Permission to Feel. And he is trying to integrate emotional intelligence into the school systems. Yeah. And he said that he has been working on that since the early 90s with his uncle. But the problem is a lot of teachers are not on board.
Yeah. Well,
and that's so sad.
I think it feels subjective to them, it's not something that they can, it's almost like it takes too much time and energy to really understand it. Yeah. And so I feel like people just think, well, you can't test it and you can't teach it, and so let's ignore it in favor of things that we can quantify and measure.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, it really is, because although there's not a standardized test, there are ways to kind of detect it. Yes. But again, they don't have that knowledge. They only have a very high level, and it really does take a deeper understanding, which again, teachers are already kind of pulled and stretched in every direction.
Overextended already. And to introduce one more thing, and it feels like the kind of thing that if done badly can almost be worse than not doing it at all. Exactly. The last thing you want is somebody just sort of half-heartedly or without really having an understanding of emotional intelligence trying to foster that in kids, because it feels like it could go wrong.
And you see that in organizations where they want to bring people in, but they do a workshop or something very surface level, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But it does work. You're just expecting people to transform just from information in a single situation or a single seminar. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
always thought the job interview process too, it would be so beneficial to have an understanding of a candidate's emotional intelligence, because really how you fit into an organization is almost more important than the tasks you're carrying out. Or, if everybody's
Right.
pulling in the same direction, you can get a lot more done than if you just have this discrete set of skills.
Exactly.
But until they're on board, where they are.
It's going to take some time, but I think people are slowly starting to see the importance of it slowly,
Too.
especially with COVID and people realizing that mental health is extremely important. And
Yep.
so we'll see what direction it goes. But
Yeah, and
again,
as higher performing larger organizations adopt tools and measures for
mhm,
emotional intelligence, then it'll trickle down. They often
yep,
lead the way on things like this, and
yep,
once they say it's important, then the rest of the workforce kind of falls in line.
that's true. That's true. Well, awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have you on today. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah.
So, what we're going to do is we're going to start with how kind of what I just talked about, how I found you, with the article and how that applies to emotional intelligence. The unfortunate part of tribalism, how it plays into that, right? Like, nobody wants a fence sitter or nobody wants anyone changing their mind because, as you said, and as you found out, that whenever you did change your mind, you felt like, well, now you're betraying the other side. And
Yes.
now you're getting backlash from both sides. And that's really unfortunate because people want you to be honest and admit when you're wrong, but only when it satisfies their assumptions and
Right. Fits their narrative.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to just kind of talk about that, and then I'm going to ask what you do as a profession
Mhm.
and how that impacted your life after you wrote that article, because I don't think you were expecting it to go viral.
Mhm.
What was life like after that? All right, here we go. Well, Julie, thank you so much for joining me today. It is an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. So, a little bit of a backstory for our listeners and viewers. So, we kind of met each other, well, connected with each other around the first of the year in 2020, whenever I
Yes.
was doing research for my book, and I came across your article that you had wrote in The Atlantic that kind of just went viral. And
Mhm.
I thought it really fell in line with the EQ deficiency and the unfortunate dark side of our deficit in emotional intelligence, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I
Mhm.
really don't know much about Julie outside of that article. So would you kind of just share a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am a native Californian, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, moved to the Midwest for college and never left. Spent about 15 years in Chicago and then moved to Cincinnati. I spent most of my career as a journalist, working at newspapers. And as that industry contracted, I went looking for other passions that I could fulfill. And I had become very interested in how cities and other local governments work as a result of my journalism. So I now work for a local government consulting firm. I do communications for them, help uh, people within the firm and people outside the firm better understand what we do. And I'm a wife and mother of two children, and hobbyist of lots of different things.
So what are
That's
your favorite hobbies?
right now. I'm very into biking and lifting weights. One good thing about COVID is just working from home. I feel like you've either had less time or more time as a result of COVID, and I happen to have had more time. and have been fortunate in that it affected all of us not during the middle of the winter. So I've been able to get out more and pick up some new hobbies too. I recently started rowing, like the sort of competitive rowing, just at a very introductory level, and I've taken up golf. So I've really been trying to feel like picking up a new hobby every 5 years or so keeps you sharp and forces you into mental challenges that are hard to replicate in other parts of your life.
That's awesome. So you're extremely athletic because all of your hobbies are very physical.
I read a lot too. I can be fairly sedentary, but I find, especially as you get older, the more you move, the better everything, the rest of your life goes.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's awesome. That's awesome. I need to lead by your example because I'm more sedentary now with COVID.
It's hard.
So let's talk about this article that you wrote for The Atlantic.
Sure.
So the title was "I Failed the Covington Catholic Test," right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's it. I failed
Okay.
the Covington test. And I wrote it. I think it's kind of interesting the way it came about. I live not too far from Covington, Kentucky, where, and just, in case someone's been under a rock for the last year and a half or so, this all came about because in February of 2019, a short video was posted on Twitter and a couple other social media outlets of a confrontation between a Native American man and some high school students from Covington, Kentucky, which, as I said, is very close to my home in Cincinnati. And it seemed to show the boys harassing this older man and jeering at him, and there was a standoff between a 16 or 17-year-old kid and this man, and it just blew up like one of those weird internet things where everybody had an opinion right away on what had happened, including myself. And it just seemed awful that these boys had done this, and it was embarrassing because I feel like people from outside the Midwest and the South to a degree have, preconceived notions and prejudices that people in the middle of the country are all backwards and racist. And so it was kind of personally embarrassing for me as well, as being infuriating. And so I talked to my son about it, who was about the age of the kids in there, and lectured him like, this is what you can't do, and you have to be respectful of everyone. And the next day he challenged me to find some of the moments that were especially inflammatory. There was talk going around that they had been chanting "Build the Wall," and all these, just this short clip, produced this entire firestorm. So by that point, longer videos were available, and I went looking through them, and it really changed my opinion of the confrontation. I thought the boys had gone up and surrounded this man when actually he walked over to them. I thought that the kid at the center, the smirker, just seemed to have this really bad attitude in the short video clip that had been posted. But seeing him in the longer video clip, I thought he looked nervous. And it was hard for me because I had, all this preconceived notion, this set narrative that had developed on Twitter especially. And then I had my son saying, no, I know people who go to this school, they're saying this. And so, what had happened was in conflict. And when I went looking for myself, I had to admit that the original narrative that I had believed in did not seem to hold up. And so I was getting a lot of texts from friends all over the country, what do you think of this? And it was hard even to articulate to them that I had changed my mind on this, because it felt like there was judgment and everyone in a certain political ideological camp liked that original narrative. It was just very neat and tidy and easy. Here's a bunch of racist white kids attacking this poor old man. And so I felt kind of vulnerable, just saying, I don't really believe the original version of this. I think it's more complicated. And a friend who was a journalist said, you should write about that. I ended up articulating my ideas to her, and I did, and it took, it spilled out of me. I mean, this was the easiest thing I've ever written, just because I had so many thoughts about it. And I wrote it up and I sent it off, and almost before I knew what was going on, it was on the Atlantic's website. Like, I sent it in, and within 20 minutes or something, it was on. Yeah,
wow.
It was fast. And this was Monday, 2 days after the video, so everybody was looking for an angle on this. And I don't even know. I don't know if I had a chance to do it again. If I would, I guess I would do it, write it again. But it didn't seem like it fulfilled my goal of wanting to provoke more discussion and and self-examination. What it did was sort of send everybody back to their camps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just stood stronger by what they already felt to be the truth. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And people supported the boys seized on it as proof that all of the attackers were wrong. Like, see, now they're admitting it and they're asking for mercy. Well, I wasn't asking for mercy or forgiveness or anything. All I was doing was observing, the evolution of my thought on this. But it felt like it's so hard right now to be intellectually honest and to say, I thought about this some more. I listened to arguments from the other side. I think they were persuasive, because, we're in tribes now, and you can't betray your tribe, because that's giving your enemy ammunition. So even if you don't agree with something, I think there's this expectation that, this is what our tribe thinks, and you better follow the party line.
Right. And, we've always had our tribes, but today it's more polarized than ever before. And so where you could find that common ground amongst other people, now it's extreme. I mean, it's like no man's land almost in between. And that's where it's becoming so challenging. And it's really unfortunate because, like you said, people want a clean, cut and dry slice of information, and they go with that because we don't like things to be complicated. Messy. We don't want this convolution. It's just, this is right, this is wrong. This is good, this is bad, this is true, this is false.
Right.
When the reality is, it's many, many shades of gray. And we have to take the good and the bad and say, well, this was bad, this was good, but good and bad can come from all angles. Right? And people are so hell-bent on standing by someone or standing by a belief and saying, well, I'm going to justify it, instead of condemning that action. Instead of condemning the behavior and supporting the person, we just support the person and the behavior, or the party and the behavior.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. I also think, and I know everybody blames social media for everything now, but the one thing that stands out to me about social media is there used to be this set of relationships of people that you knew, but not very well, your hairdresser or your tennis partner, or, and you would just have these kind of casual, fun relationships with them. Well, now that we're all connected on social media, we know their politics, we know their, innermost thoughts. And it's almost like there was that saying, before, like, it's not polite to discuss politics and religion. Like, there's a reason we don't know everything about everyone. And a lot of those sort of intermediate relationships, they've ceased to be pleasant because you just know everything about everyone. And so as a result, everything becomes political because you're constantly being confronted with people's political views and being told everything's political. And so our relationships have just all taken on this quality of like life or death. And there's just no such thing as a pleasant, casual, almost superficial relationship anymore.
It amazes me, and I've experienced this as well, but it amazes me how you can know someone, like you said, for years.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say think highly of that person, but you appreciate that person for who they are or what
Yeah.
they do or the relationship you have with them. And while you could have known them for years, as soon as something is aired out about their views on politics or religion, sometimes you just completely end that relationship just because of that. And I don't
Yeah.
think it was like that before. But I think all of us, especially in the US, can agree that the past 4 years have been the most polarized as a country we've ever been before. We've never been this disconnected when it comes to being left or right.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just really unfortunate that we can't find common ground anymore. And it's almost like we are a split nation because fear is driving us, and politicians are using that
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, if you vote for this side, because you watch the RNC or the DNC, and it's if you vote for this person, all your rights, everything that you know as an American is going to completely be dismantled and changed, which
Yeah.
isn't true.
Yeah.
But it's being used as a fear tactic. And I think that's where it gets really scary because people just go with what they know as their tribe.
Mhm.
Well, my tribe supports this, so that must be true. And
Yes.
we don't take time to think. And I think we're so bombarded with information. Our lives are much busier today than they've been before. So
Mhm.
we want that simple, clean cut answer.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't want to bombard ourselves with more stress and anxiety with really finding the truth.
Right, because it seems like so much work. And then to follow up on your comment, I also think fear is always a stronger motivator than almost any other emotion.
Yep.
Like, if you can make somebody afraid, you've kind of gotten them
Yep.
in your so it's hard to overcome that fear. And then, as you said, it's hard to sift through all the information and acknowledge the gray. You just want somebody to tell you what to believe. And I honestly think the best thing that people can do is seek out information from the other side. Like, read people you don't agree with, read publications that espouse a different point of view than your own, and just get out of the bubbles that each of us have created for ourselves.
Exactly. The echo chambers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's what science and research teaches you is to
Uh-huh.
try and disprove your case because it's only when you can't disprove it
Right.
that you have valid information because anybody can try to find information to prove, you
Or
know.
yeah.
Um, but like you said, nobody wants to do that because we don't like to be wrong. We've also been raised in a society where it's frowned upon to make mistakes. So
Hmm.
admitting that we're wrong, we're also raised in a society that's extremely competitive. So
Hmm.
being right is rewarded.
Yes.
So
And
everything goes against um, emotional intelligence.
yep.
And
Yes.
the deficit is rising every
Yeah.
day.
Yep. I think you're absolutely right, because um, using that and developing it takes time. It takes patience. It goes at a slower pace than if you just know that you're always right about everything, and we don't reward it.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though, like we were saying earlier, people say that we value honesty and integrity and being
Yeah.
able to admit when we're wrong. As we were
Yeah.
saying before, it's only if it fits that other person's narrative that it gets applauded.
Right.
Otherwise, you were
It's
right first, and now you're on the wrong side of the fence.
right. And I don't know what happened to her.
What happened? Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So after you wrote this article and it was published, what happened in the next 24, 48 hours?
Um, Tons of attention to it initially, lots of new Twitter followers, some a fair amount of anger. Some people close to me, it thanked me for writing it. But I got a couple really weird, like kind of scary letters from seemingly unstable people who
Wow.
sought out work address and sent me kind of threatening letters. Um, I don't know if it succeeded in changing anyone's mind, really. It really was seized upon by people on the right as, an admission um, of guilt, like much farther than I ever intended to make it appear. And my point too was I think really misconstrued was that this was not a story that the media created. Like the sort of mainstream media was only playing catch up on this. This was a video created, I think, by an advocacy group. I don't think they ever really figured out who created that original video. And video professionals I know who saw it said, wow, that was really slickly edited. Like that was designed to elicit emotion, and it worked exactly as it was supposed to. So I think, I talked before about leaving the newspaper industry as it was contracting. Um, I think the mainstream media now feels a need or a pressure to keep up with social media because they feel like they've taken so much of their audience away, and they're trying to give people what they seek on social media. So this firestorm kicked up on social media, specifically on Twitter, and then I think the mainstream media was struggling to catch up with it, and so they were writing about it kind of hours or a day or two late. So one of my points was nobody ever would have considered this a news story. If you had brought this to an editor's attention, they would have been like, no, I don't, that doesn't sound like news to me. And so one of my points was, if we let the news media do their job, part of which is sifting through everything that's happening and deciding what's newsworthy and what isn't, they're actually better arbiters because they're at least striving for objectivity than letting an advocacy group on social media set the agenda. And people reacted very strongly against that idea. They said the media was what got us into this, mess. And it really wasn't. They did not pay, they were not the first ones to pay attention to this. So there was a lot of pushback on that. I heard from people I hadn't heard from in a long time. And it was one of the best read stories on the Atlantic for the entire year. So it
Wow.
really, not just my story, but the whole incident just touched this weird nerve in the country, I think, that I'm still trying to understand.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go
Well,
ahead.
did you get interviewed on both sides? Like, I believe you're on CNN. Was that right?
No, I wasn't on CNN. I was on some radio shows. I was on a
You were on
Canadian.
NPR because I heard your interview on NPR, the Hidden Brain podcast.
Oh, it was Hidden Brain. Yes, the podcast,
Yeah.
Hidden Brain, and that was a couple months after it ran.
Yeah.
But yes, I was on that. I was probably on 10 or 12 different outlets. And in a way, I don't know, it made me sad for our discourse now because it's very clear that with so many competing outlets, people have time to fill. And so it's sort of like, well, what's new today? And the attention that was directed my way was almost the same attention that got us into trouble in the first place. Like, people are looking for something to be outraged by, or they're, I don't know. I wish we could ignore like three
Right.
quarters of things, because if you think about everything that you're outraged about today, if you go out a week, chances are you're not going to remember it at all. Like, does anybody remember a week ago what everybody was furious about? I thought the hidden brain episode was so excellent because they talked about how seductive outrage is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And really what these tribes are, what's fueling them, like this idea that the person on the other side is, not,
Irrational.
yeah, and it's not just that they're wrong, it's that they're ill-intentioned and evil, and like
Villains. Yeah.
yeah, they
Yeah.
must be stopped.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're right. That's so true. And that's why I was asking if you were interviewed on news networks on both sides, because I'd be curious to see how each of them spun that interview. Because a lot of
Yeah,
people choose, even if you have a full interview, they may just take segments, take things out of
right.
context. So I was
Yeah,
just curious how that went. So,
I feel like most of the conservative outlets did not interview me. They just quoted from my article as kind of evidence that, that I was asking for forgiveness. Rush Limbaugh, especially. Um, and no, I'd say most of the outlets that interviewed me were sort of straight news, middle of the road commentary. So I feel
right.
like those who interviewed me weren't necessarily using me ideologically. It was more individuals' reactions to the
Got
story.
it. Okay. Yeah. When I coach people, one of the things that I tell them, especially if they're extremely opinionated about certain things, my job as a coach is to ensure that they are emotionally intelligent, or at
Mhm.
least developing their emotional intelligence, which means you have to look at both sides, whether you want to or not. And
Yep.
oftentimes, the thing with social media is you can look at your coachees on Facebook, which I try not to do, to be honest with you, because I don't think it's a realistic depiction of who they are.
Right.
But one thing that I always ask them, if I catch a hint of strong biased opinion, is what news sources do you follow? I don't care what side you affiliate with. I'm not
Hmm.
trying to change your belief system.
Hmm.
But if you are watching any type of news source that is opinion based
Hmm.
versus just presenting the facts and allowing you to come to your own conclusion about how you feel,
Hmm.
then you need to kind of look into some other sources. Anything that's opinion based, I
Right.
don't recommend,
Yes. I
even if
totally.
there's facts involved. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a
Okay.
useful exercise too when you hold an opinion really strongly, to try to articulate what somebody holding the opposite opinion would say, so that you at least can play out their arguments and see how they form them. And I feel like that exercise came from my earlier days as a journalist, when you really are supposed to be able to understand and explain both sides. But it's useful because it's so easy just to think of the other side as crazy or evil.
Right.
And maybe sometimes they are, but just going through that exercise, like, well, why would someone believe this? And kind of like debate works, it doesn't matter what you believe, you need to be able to make arguments on both sides. And that helps you at least understand them see the other side as human. And then you can still say, like, like you were saying earlier, like, well, no, this does reaffirm my original belief, but at least now I've thought out, and considered alternatives. And I know that I've arrived at this honestly now, rather than
Exactly.
just being persuaded by, somebody that I know on Facebook.
Exactly. I hate the term fake news. I
Yeah,
absolutely hate it because
yeah,
while there is fake news,
yeah,
before it's mainly been called propaganda,
yeah,
it's always been there. However, whenever you now have this term fake news, it's just being thrown out there for any information
yeah,
that you do not agree with
right.
and
Yes.
automatically dismisses any
Mhm.
truth there is to that
And stops the discussion.
and stops the discussion.
You know,
Exactly.
it's one thing to say, I disagree with this, and we can discuss why I disagree with this. But if you just throw fake news up there, yeah, it stops the discussion and it just tracks.
I really wish that there was like debate courses in middle and high school, like that was a requirement,
Mm,
because I think that would really help people come from a place more of understanding because they realize like in a debate to win, you have to be informed on both sides
yep,
because you
yeah,
don't know what's going to be thrown at you. So if you
yes,
don't have a sound argument,
yeah,
you're going to lose. And I think it would also teach control, self-control, and respect.
hmm,
I think that would be a great course to have as a requirement, just like
yes.
English and
I
science and all of that.
completely agree, because to be able to articulate supporting arguments on either side of an issue, just kind of lowers the temperature, like, okay, there are probably good faith reasons to be on either side of this issue. And only by understanding them both, um, can we arrive at an honest opinion? Can we, debate it with other people, and really being able to debate things on their merits rather than making them emotional and making them extensions of our identity. That's the other thing, is that our beliefs are so tied to our identities now,
Yeah.
where we're just a product of your beliefs and your opinions, and it's almost like we don't know anything else about each other.
And we don't really know who we are as an
Hmm.
individual. Because
Hmm.
again, we do attach those beliefs
Yeah,
and those indoctrinations as part of who we are. So
yeah,
whenever they're threatened,
yes,
we're threatened. We can't
right,
see past that. And that's unfortunate because we change every
yeah,
day.
yeah,
We're not the same person from one day to the next, even if it's very, small fractions of an amount of change. But our cells change every day. We're not physically the same person as we
yeah,
were when we were an infant. We don't have the
right,
same bone cells or anything.
right, yeah,
We're a
everything.
completely new person.
Yep, yeah. And then disagreements feel like personal attacks when they shouldn't,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
But if we're not taught, and that's the problem, we're not taught how to
yeah,
be independent thinkers. We're not
yeah,
taught how to be emotionally intelligent and not take that as a personal attack. And I think that's another problem too, which I write about in the book, is how we teach our children. Are we
yeah,
teaching our children? Or are we
yeah,
simply conditioning our children? There's a difference between teaching and conditioning. And I
yeah,
think we're conditioning our children. This is what you should say. This is how you should act, instead of this is why we
yeah,
respond this way. And this is how we should feel because of this.
yes,
Or even asking them questions like, well, how does that make you feel? And
yeah,
why did you do what you did?
yeah, yeah. The question
Um,
underneath the questions, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
And I mean, the threat, I think, that a lot of people perceive in that is that you don't know where it's going to go. And, more than I think any era in history, we see our children as extensions of ourselves, and we want them to turn out like us. And so I think we indoctrinate them to hold a lot of the same beliefs that we do, rather than encouraging independent thought and allowing, their own questions and interests to take, to play out.
Exactly.
Say.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so true. When I was a teacher, which I was in early childhood education, I thought it was always funny because parents are like, all you do is play all day. Like, you're not a real teacher. No, you are. In fact, like, early childhood teachers are probably the biggest influence in the education system, because that's when kids are absorbing things like a sponge, and play is learning. They learn through play.
Oh,
And I think we undervalue play and what you can learn through that.
yep.
And we're not just letting them go and do whatever. We're
Right.
asking them questions. We do experiments like, do you think this is going to sink or is it going to float?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do
Yeah.
you think that? They're little scientists at that age.
Mm,
And I think we don't value kids the way that we should. They're more intelligent than we give them credit for.
oh, question.
And
And
we need to start, when they ask why, encouraging them to ask more questions
yeah.
instead of saying, stop asking why. Like, here's the answer, I'm done.
Yes. And they are completely unself-conscious at that age. And so it's such an opportunity to, to establish good habits of thought, and like you said, to encourage them to ask why, or to follow things to their logical conclusions, or to ask themselves questions about the world, because they're not, they're not intellectually trying to please anyone at that point, or like
Right.
they haven't taken on all the, the layers of wanting to please or being defensive, or all those things that we develop as we get older.
Right. Do you hear that mower? I have a lawnmower outside my window. Can you hear
Here,
that? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Because I turned my mic volume down. I was hoping it wouldn't pick anything up.
Now, that's another weird thing about working from home. Like, there's jackhammers on one side of us and
Yeah.
leaf blowers on the other. And
It's funny you talk about jackhammers, because a month or so ago, I was doing a podcast interview, and right out the window, our neighbors had some guy out there with a jackhammer. I'm like, oh my gosh, but they couldn't hear it. So that's good. That's awesome. But about children, I think that's amazing that you were able to listen to what your son had to say about the situation and take
yeah,
that into account.
yeah,
Investigate a little bit further, and that really opened your eyes to things,
it did.
which I
Yeah.
think is amazing. I mean, that in itself shows that you have emotional intelligence at some degree,
Well, and I was thrilled that he, not only did he feel comfortable, challenging me on it, but he thought that that it was worth doing. Like, it would have been easy to just be like, "Oh, mom, it's going off the handle again." But he was like, "What you're telling me does not comport with what I'm hearing from other people." And at that point, even though, as I said earlier, we see our children as extensions of ourselves, at that point, he had access to a world of, high school boys that I didn't. Like, nobody in my, online circles was asking a high school boy what they thought of all this. And so it was one of those moments where I felt lucky to have access to somebody who was different than me. And that's something else. Like, we live in these bubbles now where we only see and talk to people who are a lot like us.
Right.
And I always think, one of the unfortunate developments of the last, I don't even know when the draft stopped. I guess around after Vietnam, but elderly people, you hear them talk about, men, their army service or their military service, where a kid from Brooklyn would be with a farmer's son from Iowa, who would be with a surfer from California. And they all had this ability to meet people very different from themselves and walk away with a sort of lifelong appreciation for people because they knew those people. They knew
Right.
not all farmer sons from Iowa were, terrible people or bigots or whatever. And I we're missing that now. Like,
Definitely.
whatever socioeconomic class and geographical place that you grew up in, you usually only meet people like yourselves almost throughout your entire life now. And so we've lost the ability to see people different from ourselves as, you know, full human beings whose aspirations
Yeah,
and fears count as much as ours. So,
exactly.
not to get off on a tangent, but I would love to see some sort of national service be reinstated where people from within the United States, especially young adults, could meet other people who are very different from them.
Yeah, and I was reading a book. It's called The Death of Expertise. Have you heard of that?
I love him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I was reading that, and he kind of talks about how college used to be like that.
Yes.
That was where you go to be challenged, have your belief systems challenged, and to explore a world of diversity and
Yeah.
learn how to appreciate that diversity, which is
Yeah.
inclusion, right? Now we
Yes.
talk about diversity and inclusion, but really there's diversity with little inclusion.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and, while people still go to college, and there have been cases where someone from the country who has been sheltered goes to a university and their eyes have been opened. But
Mhm.
oftentimes you just find your own bubbles there, especially with social media now. You find these groups, you connect, and again,
Yeah.
you stay in these echo chambers.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, so
Yeah.
I don't know the solution to that. I wish I did, but I feel like it takes us to have our own personal experiences, like you were saying, to sometimes be changed. And sometimes that isn't enough because we say, oh, well, they're different. They're
Right.
not the norm.
Yeah.
But the truth is, what is portrayed on, media outlets or on social media is the minority of many populations. It is not the majority. It's
Yes.
not.
I mean, you will see issues, so hotly debated or at the center of people's thinking for, on social media. And then you walk out and talk to a normal person on the street and they have no idea what you're talking about. Like they haven't heard the latest outrage. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I have, I'm trying to remember, uh,
So
remind,
it's saying that the people that are the most ignorant, and I know some people when they hear the word ignorant, they think of stupid, which is not the same thing, right? Ignorant means you lack the information. So
right.
people that are the most ignorant believe
Yep.
that they are the most informed.
Yes. Yes.
And people who are experts tend to rate themselves as not as informed as they actually are.
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
an inverse bell curve.
No, the more confident you are of your knowledge.
Exactly, exactly. And which is scary because while that used to be, this inverted bell curve, now it's starting to be just this mountain on one side and then this tiny little valley and then this small little mound of you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
terrifying because that's saying that the people that really aren't informed are going to be hell bent on
Yeah.
proving that they are. And they're
Yes.
less likely to be open minded to any
Yep.
alternative, even if you present the facts like right in
Yeah.
front of them.
Yep. Yeah, because their emotions and their identity, again, are invested in,
Yeah,
in that opinion or that train of thought or that position. And so it's not a rational, like, that's why you can't respond with facts, because they didn't arrive at that rationally to begin with.
exactly.
Facts only work with, rational thinking. And if it's an emotional decision to believe whatever they do, then I don't know how you combat that, but not with
Right.
facts. That just
Right.
kind of people dig their heels in.
Yeah. We tend to rely on emotion first and think later.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like trying to decide if I even want to open this can of worms right now, because I know that this is going to be a very touchy subject for people,
Yeah.
but there's science backing it. And it doesn't mean that's good or bad. It just means you have to be more cautious. But science shows, or they've done tests, there's been research done where people can, researchers can identify whether you identify as a liberal or conservative
Mm.
based on your amygdala.
Oh, wow.
So the amygdala is the emotional part of
Yeah.
the brain.
Yeah.
And I may be quoting this research wrong, so don't rely on my information, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure this is what it states, that the size of the amygdala in people who identify as conservative is slightly more enlarged than those who are liberal, which
Okay.
means that it is harder to override that emotional impulse to react.
You're,
So,
yeah, that's
and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
right.
So that's why they're people who are more conservative are more driven by fear,
Mm-hmm.
and who are comfortable, as for someone who is conservative, they like the known,
Yeah.
like structure,
Yeah. You want to
because
conserve
that's a safe
tradition.
place,
Right.
which makes sense because you don't
Yeah.
want to step into that or out of that comfort zone because that evokes fear.
Mm-hmm. That makes
Whereas a
sense.
liberal tends to weigh the options, cost benefit analysis, and
Mm.
override that impulse, that fear.
That's
So I
fascinating.
thought, I was like, that is a really interesting study.
Yeah.
And
How,
the way that they did that is they did MRIs of individuals. It was a double blind study.
wow.
And it wasn't until after they measured the amygdalas, they surveyed them to ask if they were liberal or conservative. And it was
Fast.
a significant
Wow.
correlation between
I,
amygdala size and,
wow. I had
yeah,
no idea. That is
isn't
fascinating.
it? But some people
Yes.
are going to hear this and be like, no. You're going to tell me that I base it on more of emotions. Because I've heard a lot of people who identify as conservative saying that I'm not emotional. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
emotional. Well, the truth is, whether you are liberal or conservative, if you're a human being, we're all
Right.
emotional. It's
Sure.
just, are we going to rely more heavily on emotion versus logic?
Yeah. Yeah. And to what degree are we going to, or do we have the skills to override those emotions? You
And
know?
we
Yeah.
do, but it's just more difficult.
Yeah. That is fascinating.
Yeah, which is why I'm so passionate about emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
allows us to be aware of that and
Mm,
slowly rewire the brain to,
mm,
you know, that doesn't mean you're still not going to react sometimes impulsively.
no.
When you realize that you are starting to act on impulse, you can
Yeah.
say, you know what, I'm acting on impulse. I need to reel it back in or
Yes.
correct for it.
And that ability to, step back and analyze your own actions and almost look at yourself from the outside, like, how
Exactly.
did I react and why did I have that specific reaction? Yeah. It
Exactly.
is a learned process for the most part.
Third party analysis is so important to
Yeah.
be able just to like step out of your own body and like you said, look at yourself, look at the other person and kind of be that.
Possible. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's liberating. So I
Yes.
used to be extremely emotional and
Hmm.
react. just,
Mhm.
I was fiery. I mean, people stopped hanging out with me.
Wow.
My ex-mother-in-law bought me a shirt that literally said bossy on it. Like, I was extremely bossy, and then you did not want to take me out in public because I would just lose it on people and go off, and I did not care. I had
Ah,
no care in the world.
so what happened? How did you overcome it?
Um, well, so I was raised in the country,
Hmm.
and I was somewhat sheltered as a child. I wasn't around a lot of my peers, and I was in a bubble myself. And my
Hmm.
parents could not communicate effectively, so that just kind of, they were emotional as well.
Hmm.
So I just took that on. And so I just blamed everyone around me for why things were the way they were. And it wasn't until I ended my marriage, moved to another city, started dating another person, and
Hmm.
then my problems followed me. I
Oh,
started to realize that I'm the common denominator. Like,
right.
I am the problem. It's not those people, it is
Yeah.
me. I'm driving people away from me no matter where I go. And so that's where I had to look in the mirror and say, do you want to avoid the truth and just keep playing victim? Or do you want
Right.
to do something about it and maybe be happy? And so I went to school for psychology. And as I'm going to school for psychology, I'm asking myself all these questions. I started to practice mindfulness.
Hmm.
I had been on anti-anxiety medicine since I was 15 years old.
Hmm.
And then I started having panic attacks left and right when I was in my early 20s. And I was
Hmm.
just miserable. And I hadn't hit rock bottom, but
Yeah.
I was pretty close emotionally.
Yeah.
And so I just said, you've got to make a change.
Hmm.
And I had to face my personal demons. But I'm telling you, when I realized that I was responsible for my
Wow.
misery,
Yeah.
it was the most liberating thing. And a lot of people don't want to admit that they're responsible for their misery
Right. Because it's easier to blame.
because it's easier to
But-
blame, but it's so much harder in the long run.
Right.
It's
Right.
so much harder in the long run.
Yep. Yeah. If you want to be happy.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm so passionate about what I do because I see the difference that it makes
Right.
in my life. And
Yes.
I feel so bad for people that have not came to that realization yet and are so resistant to it. Because I'm just like, just,
You're wasting,
yeah,
yeah,
you're
potential.
wasting your life and you just need to, I'm trying to think of the word that somebody said before. Um, it's almost like a release, just like let it go
Yeah.
and let things happen and
Yep.
control what you can and don't
Yeah.
worry about what you can't.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easier said than done, but
Gonna-
once you get to that point, it's easy. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, it's easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you can see it again, like kind of from the outside, like, well, you could, have a very emotional reaction and end up in a fight with this person, or you could realize, you can't do anything about it and step away. That's
Exactly.
great. That is so cool.
Yeah. Well, Julie, we are kind of at the top of the hour now.
Okay.
But I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you.
I
I
love
could
this.
continue this
Thank you so
conversation with you, but I don't want to take up more of your time than we had scheduled. But so if it's not going to put you on the spot too much, I
much.
would like to allow you to kind of have the last word. What do you think is the solution at an individual level for someone to take away from this conversation? What tip would you give them?
Yeah, I think to begin practicing empathy um, is, has so many benefits. It allows you to see other people as people rather than just, the sum of their positions. It allows for the possibility of connection with other people, especially people that you might not have connected with before. And it allows you, like, I think empathy has the benefit of giving yourself grace
Mhm. Yeah.
because you can see other people as flawed human beings who are doing their best, then you can kind of see yourself as that too. And so I feel like, empathy is central to emotional intelligence and has the potential to change our relationships, and that can ultimately change the world.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Julie. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Really enjoyed it. And let me know if there's anything else I can do, okay?
Thank you so much.
Part of the book or anything else.
Thank you.